for where you stand.
You live in Italy, and as you know, I was just in Italy. We tried to get together, but we couldn't get our schedules together. We'll do it the next time. But I interacted with a lot of people, and my takeaway is that the elites in Italy are European elites who nominally support the war, but the average everyday folks were largely indifferent to it, which in some respect liberates the elites in the government and academia and elsewhere to do what they want, because they don't have to answer to the masses, because the masses don't care. Do you have the same finger on the same pulse that I saw? I was just there for 2 weeks.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, we do have in Europe a sort of, if you like, a continent-wide deep state that works from within the system, within the mechanism. It has complete media support, and messaging is all coordinated. And so it's very hard to stand out. So you have in Italy, as you saw, Meloni, who is technically sitting on her electorate, which is anti the war in Ukraine. But she is for it because that's how you've got to do politics in Brussels. If you want to get the right coalition in the European Parliament, if you want to have a say in who's going to be the next head of commission, who's going to replace von der Leyen, you have to be pro-Europe. You can't be against everything at the same time, because they will just crush you.
Here is the cheerleader in chief, President Biden, making what I think is an absurd statement, but I'll let you comment on it. In Helsinki, the day after, so we're 2 weeks behind now, the day after the conclusion of the NATO conference at Vilnius.
The issue of whether or not this is going to keep Putin from continuing to fight, the answer is Putin's already lost the war. Putin has a real problem. How does he move from here? What does he do? And so the idea that there's going to be what vehicle is used, he could end the war tomorrow. He could just say, I'm out. But what agreement is ultimately reached depends upon Putin and what he decides to do. But there is no possibility of him winning the war in Ukraine. He's already lost that war. Imagine anyway, he's already lost that war.
How absurd is that? There's no possibility of him winning the war. He either is intentionally misleading or believing the mainstream media, which is largely fed by the CIA and MI6.
Yes, I think this is exactly right, but it's not just him who's saying it. It's the head of CIA, it's the head of MI6, it's Blinken, it's Suleiman, the entire team. The team is sticking to the narrative. Russia, Putin is losing. Now, some people say, well, are they completely deluded? Is it they're being misled and given the wrong briefing? Or is something else going on? And I think there is something else, because I think there is a pattern to this and what they're trying to do, because otherwise it's almost inexplicable that they should be saying the same mantra, all of them together, without any sort of qualification.
Right. Let me stop you for a minute before you analyze and reinforce what you've just said. Here's Jake Sullivan, the president's national security advisor, using almost literally the same words as the president. To your point.
I can't speak to what's in the mind of President Putin. All I can say is that the basic U.S. position in this comes down to a single clear point, which is we are going to support Ukraine without having U.S. boots on the ground and American soldiers fighting Russian soldiers, and that will remain consistent throughout the course of this conflict.
There's CIA director and former U.S. ambassador to Moscow, William Burns, at the Aspen Institute, a place to which you and I happily would not likely ever be invited.
Weaknesses have been exposed by Prigozhin's mutiny, but I think even more deeply than that, they've been exposed by Putin's misjudgment since he launched this invasion as well. And I think there's a relationship between the battleground in Ukraine and what's going on inside Russia, in the sense that if and when the Ukrainians make further advances on the battlefield, I think what that's going to do is cause more and more Russians in the elite and outside the elite to pay attention to Prigozhin's critique of the war. Putin is someone who generally thinks that revenge is a dish best served cold. So he's going to try to settle the situation to the extent he can. But again, in my experience, Putin is the ultimate apostle of payback. So I would be surprised if Prigozhin escapes further retribution for this. So in that sense, the president's right. If I were Prigozhin, I wouldn't fire my food taster.
All right, to your point, what is motivating them to say this?
I think there's a pattern here that explains it. Whether we look at, first of all, if we look at the Biden corruption allegations that are made, what do we see? We see absolutely no acknowledgement of anything, absolute rigid, no budging from narrative at all. And then you wait, and then, as I think Jonathan Turley pointed out, you get a scandal implosion system being produced. Suddenly, a year later, after he first suggested, you find that his son, Hunter, has a plea settlement with late payment of tax that is due. No punishment, no jail or anything like this. And then all the chorus from the White House, from the press, move on, forget it, it's over, let's move on. No scandal, let's move on. I don't think it's working particularly because things are changing, events on the ground are changing it. We had the same with Nord Stream. No admission, nothing, narrative was held fully. And then finally, the CIA comes up with a scandal imploder. Oh, we found a yacht with a few aqualung experts on it who go down and will have blown up the pipeline. And now I think we have with Ukraine, which is so significant and so disastrous, the failure for the West as a whole. Again, not aligned. Stick to the narrative. Keep it going. Preparing for the sort of scandal implosion, which will be to blame. Look, we gave those people everything. We gave them everything, and they failed to follow our advice. They're at fault. But not yet, because they need a few more months really to try and get to the point where you say, Ukraine, let's move on from there. Let's go to a different conversation. Find a way out of this, because they know ultimately, when all this talk about, we could speak to Putin, we could have a negotiation, we could do with that. They know what Putin's position would be. I want capitulation. I want complete capitulation from Kiev. That is my bottom line, and that's what I intend to get with your help or without it. But with that, everything implodes. The whole narrative implodes. NATO is shown up to be no omnipotent power. Western weapons are shown up to be pretty useless. NATO is not even shown to be pretty competent at running a war.
America.
So it's a major disaster, I think, in the making.
America has run out of artillery shells to deliver to Ukraine, and Admiral Kirby, the spokesperson for the American National Security Council, acknowledges we've sent cluster bombs in their place. Is American military power, Alastair Crooke, largely a myth now exposed?
Totally exposed. It has been exposed really cruelly on the ground in Ukraine. The failure of weapon systems that were promised to be game changers, the failure actually of doctrine, of actually operating, sending off the Ukrainians in tanks into minefields. The doctrine of 73 Easting, which your colleague led, Colonel McGregor led. It doesn't apply. It wasn't appropriate when dealing with the Russians who spent months building their defenses for this. But nonetheless, they go on with it and they continue. And what we heard about the lack of ammunition shows, people go into this and they never think through. We don't go to the next stage. Has anyone asked the question, what happens if the Russians defeat us on the field in Ukraine? What will be the impact on the West? I don't know, but I doubt it. They just go in, with a great deal of enthusiasm and a narrative. And the narrative is everything. Oh, we're the West. We can't possibly lose.
McGregor and Scott Ritter say the war is over. The Russians have won, and Zelensky is looking for an out. I can't imagine that he would expect that out would be someplace in Kyiv or anywhere in Ukraine or even anywhere in Eastern Europe. How do you see this ending, Alastair?
Well, Putin has said it very clearly, and others, spokesman Patrushev and others have said the same thing. The regime in Kiev has to go. They say this war, Putin says specifically, this war ends when there are no Ukrainian forces in the field and no NATO weapons in the field. That, is not a place in which any of those people you were just giving shots of from the team Biden are going to be able to negotiate on that basis. It would be impossible. That's why I think they're sticking with keeping to narrative. Russia is losing, this war is lost, because it's an embarrassment and going to become a worse embarrassment. All their concentration is now how to get out of this without the humiliation becoming too evident, if you like. Get people to move on. Drop this.
I hate to say this.
Get on.
I hate to say this, but this is my thinking. The Biden administration has made such a mess of this. The American public is so sick and tired of let's move on, let's move on. The president is so desperate to change the narrative from his reprehensible, incompetent leadership to you need me now, is that he might cause something to happen which will allow him to argue you need me now. Some sort of false flag emergency type event, God forbid people die, in order to induce the American public to rally around him. I don't know what else he possibly has left of his decrepit administration and terrible leadership. I'll give you the last word.
NATO's not capable. There aren't the people on the ground. They don't have the weapons. NATO is being exposed as really an empty drum.
Well, Alastair, you have become a fan favorite on Judging Freedom. I want you to know that. So when and where can the Judging Freedom fans see more of you or get more of your work?
Well, I do those articles, a weekly article on strategicculture.org. That's probably the best place. The other one is not so accessible. I do things about the Middle East and what's happening on Al Mayadeen in English, but it's basically geared for the Arabic world. Okay. So you have those two places.
Strategicculture.org is where I get your materials. Thank you very much, my dear friend. It's always a pleasure. It's great to be back in the saddle with you, as we say here in the U.S. I look forward to chatting with you again, resuming our regular weekly chats.
Back in the mayhem.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you like what you saw, tell a friend, subscribe, and as you know, more as we get it. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.